Kiah Roache-Turner, thank you very, very much for joining us to talk about your new film, Wyrmwood Apocalypse. Just wondering if just to start us off, if maybe you think the film is a little too subtle. If it's a bit understated.
I've been accused of many things in my life, Jim, never subtlety. This
Go on.
film it's like the anti-art house film. Like if you want to go and see a film where a long-lost lover reconnects with a distant Bulgarian aunt, this is not the one. This is a film where we start off with a head explosion and then we pretty much keep that going for about 96 minutes. It's a wild, incredibly semi-hyper-violent fantasy comic book world, and subtlety it ain't. Yeah, we try and lift, it starts with a bang and we try and lift each bang to be sort of louder and more crazier as we run along.
Okay. How do you see yourself as a filmmaker in the current Australian filmmaking environment?
Well, that's always a difficult thing to do because you've got to kind of categorize yourself. But I guess if I had to describe myself in a single sentence, if somebody called me the Australian Sam Raimi, I wouldn't be upset, put it that way. So, you know, the fact that Sam Raimi or Peter Jackson, if you want to come at it from a New Zealand angle, you know, these are guys who kind of went out and made their own films on their own dime in their own way. And they're famously horror film directors. That's kind of where I'm at. The filmmakers who create a world, you know, and that's what I like to do. I like to create a really crazy, insane fantasy world and then live in it for 96 minutes.
You're talking about their early work.
100%, yeah. Okay. I mean, you know, Peter Jackson is two filmmakers. He's the guy who made Brain Dead and Bad Taste, and then he's the guy who made Lord of the Rings. I'm the Brain Dead version because nobody's given me $160 million yet.
Describe Wyrmwood Apocalypse.
The poster pitch is Mad Max meets Dawn of the Dead. So if you like Mad Max and you like Dawn of the Dead, like you're going to like the Wyrmwood world, like for sure. The basic pitch is, you know, we start with a guy a year into the zombie apocalypse. The world is infested by, you know, flesh-eating zombies who breathe a methane-like substance that powers all the vehicles and engines in the world. So that's where we start. Now, this is a guy who we think is working for the bad guys. He thinks he's working for the good guys. He comes across a band of survivors who are non-military. Amongst those survivors is a hybrid half-zombie, half-human girl who may or may not be the key to the cure. And, you know, through his relationship with them, he realizes that he needs to change his tune and become one of the good guys. And there's also a massive cyborg zombie involved. So If you like the sound of all those things, you should watch this film.
Wyrmwood Apocalypse is a very, very entertaining film. And I really have to congratulate you on presumably delivering the exact type of film you wanted to make.
That's exactly what it was. And one of the great things about this film is, you know, we had Final Cut. Our producer, Blake Northfield, approached us with a great pitch for the sequel. He said, boys, I'm going to get you the money. I'm going to lift professionally from the first film. I'm going to put together a crew and an amazing cast of characters and people for you guys to work with, and then I'm going to get out of the way creatively, which is what he did. So we were able to make exactly the film that we wanted, which is a very rare thing these days, even in independent film.
Can you just unpack that a little about the value of having a producer who kind of knows when to be there and when to step back?
It's kind of everything. Like, I've been in the business long enough to know now that, like, if you're going to make something and you're going to make something good, because film is a team sport, you can't do it on your own. If you want to do it on your own, become a painter or an author, not a filmmaker, because you've got to work with a bunch of people. You have to pick your collaborators very carefully. And if you and your collaborator have a respect and you're both making the same thing, you're already halfway there. And a producer like Blake Northfield, who knows his stuff backwards and forwards, he's a very professional guy. He expects a lot. To have a guy like that truly believe in your vision means that I'm going to get my vision up on screen in a very dynamic way, because he'll make it happen and I'll make sure it's good. And that's the perfect collaboration, and, he would be very respectful when he had a point, and he would make the point intensely and respectfully. And if I agreed, great. And if I didn't, he'd step out of the way, which is really a wonderful thing. And sometimes he was right and sometimes I was wrong, but he'd let me be wrong. Sometimes you're allowed to make little tiny mistakes, that's fine. And, in the end, I think even some things that I'm not sure that I was right on, I'm glad that I got my way, because it's a singular vision. And that's the thing about a film, is like sometimes a film's flaws are the thing that makes it original. And so, he took my vision and my brother's vision, warts and all. And, whether it's successful or whether people like it or not, obviously that's a big deal to me. But at the same time, I'm not really bothered, because I like the film.
What were the guiding principles regarding the pacing, the editing, and the sound design on this film?
Well, I have a style, and the style is pretty frenetic. I do a lot of my own temp sound design, so I've got a very clear idea of what I want in terms of sound design. And I was just lucky that I had a team called Folklore, led by Sam Gain Emery, on the sound. And I mean, these guys are one of the best I've ever worked with, and I've worked with Oscar winners, so these guys are so good. I just wanted to go back to exactly my style, which is just high-end, frenetic, take a comic book, put it on screen. Like my brother and I really grew up reading comic books, X-Men, Punisher, even 2000 AD, and I wanted to get that up on screen. But with this one, I really kind of wanted to let myself go a little bit. I wanted to be able to leave a shot slightly longer than necessary. I wanted to slow the pace down a little bit. I know once you see the film, it's like, oh my God, like it's pretty full on, but that's actually me trying to slow down every now and again. I really wanted to insert some kind of beauty in between the exploding heads. But basically, I have a style that's pretty intense. I don't know if I have a philosophy, but like if it isn't interesting, I cut it. Like it's that simple. So I like a film that moves, and whether it's a slow scene or a fast scene, it's got to move. It's got to feel dynamic. And anything that was like flabby or fatty just got cut off, and that's just my style. I like maximum entertainment and minimum kind of bollocks, if you know what I mean.
That's another line you can use on the poster. Can you just give us some facts and figures about the making of the film?
The budget is hard. It was definitely under 3 million, but it kind of goes up, and I don't know the budget, because I think I know the budget, and then Blake will tell you it's for. All I know is like it was small. Like we couldn't afford overtime. We couldn't afford half the things that we wanted. We had to be very careful and cut a lot of stuff, and it was a really intense shoot, just because the budget was incredibly small.
And how long did it take to shoot this film?
We shot it in 6 weeks, and then we had an extra day of shooting paid for by Screen Australia. So the opening scene of the film wasn't originally in the cut, and we got to the finished cut and we went, it's missing something. So we made a pitch to Screen Australia. They gave us an extra day, thank God. So we got a grant funding to have that opening scene, which is honestly one of the best scenes in the film. So 6 weeks and 1 day is how long we had to shoot it. We shot the entire thing out on an ex-fruit farm in Dural. Because it was COVID, we all stayed on a caravan park, about 10 minutes down the road. We stayed in a bubble. So we just rented out an entire park and the whole crew stayed out there. And so, we were so bubbleized that we didn't even have a single case of a cold, let alone COVID. So it was pretty damn safe out there. I think we used like over 1,000 litres of fake blood. That farm was pretty green when we arrived. It was red when we left, just hundreds of pounds of prosthetics would have been used. Every single scene had a zombie or something that had to be built. We spent about 3 or 4 months constructing the sets out there on the farm. And, everything's pretty much practical. The muzzle flashes and the head explosions are all digital. Everything else you see is practical. So I have an obsession with practical. I think that if you build it and it's real on screen, you can tell. And there's nothing worse than low budget digital effects. So the digital effects that we have on screen, even though we have a fair amount of them, we used very minimally and only in conjunction with a practical effect. So there's nothing that's completely digitally created. It's all a hybrid of real stuff and just a little bit of digital. Yeah. So if anything, that's a big philosophy of mine. I didn't get into this game to shoot on green screen. I got into this game so that I could have a 6-foot-tall zombie cyborg coming at me. And I have to actually get out of the way or they'll smash the camera. That's what I like to do. I want to do it all practically. I'm old school like that. That's why I'm more like Peter Jackson and Sam Raimi than the new directors. I want to shoot real blood. I want to finish the end of a shooting day and I have to wipe the gore off myself. That's how I want to make movies, and that's who I am as a filmmaker.
You mentioned the amount of blood that you used in this film. A good proportion of that actually ends up on the camera lens, which is a very nice effect. I presume that that's a digital add-on.
I think that's 70% digital add-on, and there's a few that actually went on the lens. The camera house wasn't super happy. And it's always weird to get an email from a camera house going, can you please wipe the brains off the cameras before returning them? Oh, sorry. But that's horror filmmaking. What do you do?
Can you just quickly tell me the value of storyboarding a film like this? I'd like to know how intensely you storyboarded the film and, how that actually just helps when you're actually on the day under pressure shooting something that you've got that guide.
I'm really glad you asked that question. I would say with the films that I make, the amount of setups that I need to get done on a daily basis and the fact that we can't afford overtime means that the only way you're going to get your schedule done is by storyboards. So there was a key sequence, the post-credit sequence, where he sort of wakes up in his compound and goes through his routine. That was a day where we had 96 setups. And the only way we were able to get through that is because I storyboarded every single shot and we stuck to the storyboards. We didn't stuff around. We didn't stop shooting. We got there, we had breakfast, we unpacked the cameras. We didn't stop shooting until the end of the day. We had 3 cameras going constantly and we got 96 setups. And the only way to do that is by following the storyboards. Now, luckily I can draw, I can write and I can draw and I can edit. So those things really save time because I shoot to edit. So I know exactly what I need. So I'm only getting the little pieces that I know are going to work in the edit. So I'm never short at the end of the day because I know what I need as an editor. I can draw. So I draw all my own storyboards myself. And on an action day, there's no time for improv. The only improv you're doing is well, that was supposed to be on the left-hand side of frame, but it's on the right. So we're going to have to rejig everything. Go, 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 go. There's no time for motivation. What would my character be thinking here? Maybe if we did. No, there's no maybe. It's we're sticking to the storyboards and we're shooting. And that's how we make our day, So to get 96 setups in a day is all down to the professionalism of the crew, the preparation that you do, and the storyboards that are sitting on your lap. It's a very, very important part of the process, part of my process anyway,
I would lay a fair amount of money that there would be experienced independent filmmakers who, when they hear that you put in that amount of setups in one day, will be astonished. That is a breakneck pace to be working at.
Well, the thing that I love is it's impossible. I mean, I think the average Hollywood film maybe would do 7 setups in a day, maybe more these days, 10 maybe. An independent film might do 20, 25. If you've got a real run and gun crew and a director who's done commercials and music videos, they might get 40 done. That's on an incredible day. But to get 96 is impossible. And the fact that we got it and it looks good, you've seen, the scene looks fine. You wouldn't know it, We had a single day to shoot all of that stuff and it kind of looks good. And again, maybe the background in commercials and music videos has helped in that regard, because often on a music video, you'll get to the end of the day and you'll have, that much footage. but it's rare in a feature film because on a music video, oftentimes you're just shooting a bunch of dancing crap. But on a feature film, it's a very specific narrative that you're telling, and it's quite complicated. Every setup is quite complicated. So to be able to race through that many setups in a day is crazy, and I'm pretty proud that it was all in focus, you know.
Just quickly, can you put Nektronic into perspective for us? This is the film that you made after Wyrmwood. It looked like a much bigger budget film. Yeah. Please put it in perspective for us.
It was a big learning experience. Like the first film we made ourselves, we paid for it and we shot it on weekends over a 3.5 year period. So we had creative control, final cut. We could do whatever we wanted. So the film that we made was the film we wanted to make. Then we got a shot to do like a big budget, you know, $10 million sort of studio film. And it's a fun film. A lot of people really like it, but it doesn't feel like mine. Maybe 45% of what I wanted is on screen, and the story really got away from me. What I realized, I didn't realize that in a studio perspective, 7 people make every creative decision, like every single creative decision, even down to the shade of lipstick that somebody might be wearing or like the color of a wall. Everything's talked to death, and it's really hard to push through a singular vision. And what I've realized is it's very hard to create original content through a corporate paradigm. It's a lot harder than it looks from the outside. And, you know, for somebody like Christopher Nolan or Guillermo del Toro or Steven Spielberg, I don't even know how these guys do it. I mean, they're able to have a singular vision and work on a $100 million corporate event at the same time. I'm still trying to work out how to do that. So Wyrmwood Apocalypse was a bit of a reaction to that. You know, we decided that on our third film, you know, we had to go back to the way that we did it on our first, which is why when Blake came along and pitched the idea that he'd put together a budget that was, you know, big enough to lift from the first film and small enough for us to have final cut, we were just like, let's go, let's do it, because we don't want to make Wyrmwood 2 if we can't make it exactly as we want it. And I don't want to be second guessed on any decision. So one of the things I love about Wyrmwood 2 is whether you like it or not, whether anybody likes it or not, that's exactly the film that we wanted to make, you know? And the only changes we made were due to necessity or budget. And, you know, I find that I'm a director who definitely works better when I've got a bit of creative control, you know?
You have a wonderful young actress in this film, Tasia Zalar, who puts in a terrific performance. She is an Indigenous person.
Yeah.
Nowhere in the film, unless I missed something, do you make any reference to the fact that she's Indigenous? No references to background, to history or anything. She's just there playing her part in a narrative. That struck me as being quite progressive. A good thing.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that. That was always the intent. I mean, the two sisters, Tasia Zalar and Shantae Barnes-Cowan, are playing the nieces of Leon Burchill, who was in the first film. And I just wanted them to be characters in the film. And we had that conversation because if you've got Indigenous actors in your film, you have to do due diligence and, like, you know, you get an Indigenous advisor on board. We'd have the conversation with Indigenous consultants where they'd say, what's your Indigenous content? And I'd say the Indigenous content is we've cast Indigenous people. And they go, yeah, but what's the Indigenous content? And I'd go, no, they just exist in the narrative. There's no reference. And they'd go, oh, well, go ahead then, make the film. Like there's nothing to say. It's like we're not making a thing about it. It's just, you know, that's the country that we live in. And, you know, there's all different types. And we didn't feel like we needed to make any reference to the Indigenous content. We made a fair bit of reference to Indigenous content in the first one because Leon wanted to. He just kind of improv'd a lot of that stuff and he wanted to put it in. And I said, hey, you do whatever you want. You know, this is your character. I'm not going to push that stuff on anybody. And as a white filmmaker, it's not really my right to do that. I just wanted them to be badasses. That's all. It wasn't a question of what their skin color was. They're badasses whether they're Indigenous or not. I was more interested in making sure that their arcs were correct emotionally. The culture's not. It's not really about that. It's about people and connections and family and exploding heads. It's not my job to talk about any of that stuff. And, if it feels refreshing, then that's fantastic. This is a story that's about a lot of things, but it's mostly about people in a really intense situation. It's about survival, it's about redemption. But those are human issues, and that's what it should be. It should be a film about human issues and some exploding heads.
These Indigenous consultants that you referenced, are they just consultants? Do they have power of veto or anything like that, or are they just there to give you their opinion on certain things?
Yeah, 100% they have power of veto, and they should have power of veto. But, I mean, this just wasn't a film that was about anything other than, like I said, survival and redemption and zombies. And because we were pretty careful not to make it about culture or race, there wasn't really much to talk about other than these are the actors that we've chosen and they're awesome and we're going to make the film.
Okay.
That was pretty much the conversation,
I'm presuming that it's because you're casting Indigenous people, that's why you have consultants. I'm just keen to know just how this part of the filmmaking process operates.
Yeah. And it's interesting you should ask, actually. We had a whole section where we talked about the backstory of the two sisters, and it was going to start with them at a family gathering, and zombies took over and a bunch of stuff happened. And so because of budget, we weren't able to shoot that backstory because it wasn't narrative specific. And then we got to the end of it and we're kind of like, well, we'd like to tell that story, but we want to move it to the start of the film. And interestingly, we were talking to some Indigenous consultants at Screen Australia, and they said, hey, listen, if you move that scene to the start of the film, it's a First Nations film because you're starting with them. And you can't really do that. And I found that fascinating. So I was like, oh, okay, all right, so I can't do that scene, which is fair enough. I understood the point. I understood it. So I had to think of a different scene. So the opening scene that you see between Brooke and Barry and Grace and Maxie is a scene that I rewrote on the fly because we couldn't make it First Nations specific. So what I did was I made that scene, which we desperately needed because it added emotional context to the film, I made it narrative specific rather than about their family, an extended family, all of whom would be Indigenous. So I had to think fast and be taught about cultural sensitivity and rewrite the whole thing. And actually, it's an example of how Indigenous consultants in general, and being race sensitive can improve your film. Because now I'm thinking, how can this film even exist without that opening scene? It's so damn good. And the fact that they told me I couldn't do the other one meant that I did this one, which improved the film. So it's a fascinating, as a white dude, who wants to have Indigenous content in his film, but respectfully, it was a fascinating lesson in, how this whole thing can actually improve not only your understanding of, race roles and relations and politics, but how it can improve your art.
The issue of gun safety is very big at the moment, thanks to the Alec Baldwin incident. Can you tell us about the realities of gun safety procedures on your movie?
Well, we didn't have a single live round in the entire film. All the guns we used were either plastic or just had block chambers. Now, I do that for three reasons, actually. One is safety. Obviously, it's really dangerous. Two, because of safety, you have to wait like 30 or 40 minutes just to shoot a round if you're doing it properly, and you should never rush something like that. And three, I found through experience, I haven't done a lot of live rounds, but through the ones that I've been involved with, I actually find it looks better digitally. Like half the time, you can't get the shutter speed right, so you miss the muzzle flash. It's really loud. It's like very uncomfortable to be around that kind of danger. Like, I mean, stunts are hard enough without having live rounds. Like, it's always an uncomfortable moment on set. And I find, like, the fact that you can craft the muzzle flash yourself, you can decide how big, how small, how much smoke, and how much sparks come out of the barrel. To be able to craft it digitally is better. And all you have to do is have somebody behind the camera flashing a big yellow light, and it looks like a practical effect. And you don't have to wait for anything. And like you can get through 96 setups a day and have guns on set completely safely. Okay. So it makes zero sense for anybody to have a live round anywhere near a set. Yeah. It just doesn't make sense.
When you say live round, I think what you mean is you didn't actually have a blank cartridge there actually firing out of a pop gun.
When I say live round, I mean when I say live round, I mean a blank.
Yeah,
something that actually fires
right.
Like a real explosion.
So your actors are actually running around pointing guns, pretending to shoot. There's no audio on set. There's obviously nothing firing on set. So you're adding all that stuff digitally post-production, including that wonderful minigun that you had. And thank you very much, by the way, for having a minigun in there, because they are an extraordinary weapon. And so congratulations on that. But so that was the reality of the actual shoot of the film.
I'm a child of the 80s, so I grew up watching Arnold Schwarzenegger fire a minigun from his hip in Commando and Predator. Come on. Gotta have one.
Yeah.
And it's so juicy too, because you hear it goes, so you hear the whine of the engine. It's the hard part about making actors act out, the guns rather than have an actual live round. Is it's actually really difficult to get them not to make the noise. I'm like, Luke, can you stop going pew pew? Because you do it unconsciously. It's like you can't stop yourself. So half of our takes are us going, cut. You're making the sound again, Luke. Sorry. Okay. Very funny.
You reference 1138 in the film, which is an obvious George Lucas reference. Just quickly, Kiah, who are your filmmaking heroes? Who do you really admire?
Oh, well, obviously George Miller and Sam Raimi and Peter Jackson. I mean, that's an obvious one. But secretly, I'd love to go out and make a film like Taxi Driver. Scorsese is my favorite director of all time. I grew up watching David Lynch films. I'm pretty obsessed with older films. I think one of the most perfect films ever made is Carol Reed's The Third Man. Touch of Evil is just like, I could watch that 50 times in a day and still learn, really important things about cinema. I mean, I'm a Fellini fan. I'm just a film nerd at the end of the day. I kind of love it all. For a film like this, the major draws would be, Sam Raimi and George Miller. But I wanted to put some Apocalypse Now in there, so the look of the film is occasionally Apocalypse Now with all the smoke and, the look of Reese. The bald heads, these are all classic. And the sort of the color palette, Esther Rosenberg, the production designer, and myself were very clear that we were trying for a Apocalypse Now color palette. I even tried like a really intense tobacco filter, to make it look like, Vietnam. That didn't really work, so we had to pull that back. But, my favorite films are Blade Runner, Apocalypse Now, Star Wars, and Raiders of the Lost Ark, all the standard ones,
Wyrmwood, though it had quite a big profile, was victim to a lot of pirating. It was a very, very pirated film. Have you been able to take any measures to prevent that from happening again?
Well, yeah, we got super pirated. One of the biggest problems was that it got released in America, and then we had to wait, 6 or 8 weeks or whatever it was for it to be released in Australia. So people just ripped it off iTunes and just pirated the crap out of it. It was one of the most pirated films of 2015, which is a bittersweet. I mean, everybody's watching it, but nobody's paying for it. It's a tricky thing to watch. So we're being very careful now to make sure that with our release and distribution, everybody's on point. So we're going to release in Australia theatrically, and then America very quickly after that. And we're going to make sure that the amount of time, the window between theatrical and digital is much smaller, and all occurs at around the same time globally, so that we don't have that issue.
How's your Hollywood footprint?
I don't know, Jim. I mean, we'll see. I mean, I don't think I have a Hollywood footprint. I make films in Australia. That's the thing. I mean, if somebody offered me Wolverine 7, I'd take it in a second. But because of the experience I've had with a studio film, I know that it's a tricky situation. So you don't want to be the person to go over there and fail, because $100 million is a lot to lose. But also you need to have a profile big enough for them to give you creative control. The classic thing is Taika Waititi went over there and was able to make personal, films and retain his vision on a $150 million Thor budget. But I think one of the reasons he can do that, other than being a great artist, obviously, is that, all of his films made a lot of money. They all had small budgets and great returns. And so he could go over there with a bit of a, hey, F you attitude, I'm Taika Waititi, take me or leave me. And that's not something that you can do unless you make a lot of money. So I think if Wyrmwood does well, I may get some offers, and hopefully I'll be able to go over there and not make a fool of myself. But if I have to make films here for the rest of my life, Jim, I'm happy. I don't mind. Anytime I get to make a film, even on a low budget, I'm happy. So I'm not really fussed.
What aspects of Australian cinema culture do you best connect with? And are there aspects of Australian cinema culture that you consciously work against, that you don't like?
I'm pretty old school. I mean, I grew up watching Mad Max, so I'm stuck in glass like I'm 43 years old, so I'm stuck with what I loved when I was a kid. So I can't really relate to a lot of film culture now, just because I'm an old dude, So I love Mad Max and Mad Max 2, and like my favorite Australian film of all time is Gallipoli. Like Peter Weir is a god, and nobody talks about him enough. Like this guy has made some of the best films I've ever seen. Like Master and Commander, I've seen 50 times. Like this guy, he's phenomenal. I mean, just watch Gallipoli again. Like that film is as good as Paths of Glory. So the stuff from the 70s and 80s is the stuff that I like, the stuff that I love, and the stuff that I try to emulate, So, yeah, I guess you'd say I have a retro relationship with Australian cinema. I've never seen a Peter Weir film I didn't like. It's beautiful. Like that film is flawed, but it makes you cry. Like it's gorgeous. That bit where he's out on the edge of the thing, he's got his arms out and he's like twirling around. It's amazing. He has this way where he does sequences that transcend. I mean, he's a hell of a storyteller. I mean, Witness is an action thriller, and that film is one of the most poetic things I've ever seen. The barn building scene alone gives me chills. And he introduced the world to Viggo Mortensen. So, Peter Weir, man. Oh, I love him. He's really my hero.
I understand that you are at the moment developing a third Wyrmwood film.
Yes. Look, I mean, I'm taking notes, and I've got so many ideas.
Right.
Like, I'm ready. I could write it tomorrow. But and this, if you've got followers, if you've got people who are watching this, please go and see Wyrmwood 2 in the theatre. Please rent it, buy it. If you're a reviewer, go on and rate it, because like the money that you spend on it and the ratings that you give it, the fact that you share it with a friend, all of these things will determine whether or not Wyrmwood 3 will be made. If this film does even vaguely well, in this climate, if it gets decent reviews and like okay money, we get to make Wyrmwood 3. So please go out and watch it, because I want to do it. I want to make Wyrmwood 3. I want that to be my next film. Well, Wyrmwood is set in the bush or in bunkers or in survival huts or vehicles, Like I said, it's Dawn of the Dead meets Mad Max. So they're either in a zombie-powered truck rattling along, or they're in a military-style bunker, or they're in the Aussie bush. And that's partially by necessity because it's cheaper to go out and film in the bush. For us, it is anyway. We don't have to pay for locations. You just pay for one big location and off you go. And it's sort of the way we do it, it really does give it a look. The backgrounds in our films are either the Australian bush or it's 2000 AD inspired comic book sci-fi. Right. Which is a really interesting look. It's one of the things I think that if people are interested in it, it's one of the reasons why it works. So that'll be more of the same for Wyrmwood 3, really.